College isn't cheap and neither is food. That's why I found myself working at the local fair during my freshman year. My student loans were already piling up, and I needed every penny I could get. I was stationed at the bumper cars that day, and thankfully, my manager had enough sense to put me under a tent. The summer heat was brutal, and the last thing he wanted was an 18-year-old getting heat stroke on his watch. It was just another ordinary day until I spotted them approaching the ride, a mother and her young son. The poor kid's face was bright red from the heat, and all he had was a lollipop while his mother was chugging water from a bottle. Something else caught my attention too. The kid looked way too small for the bumper cars. At our fair, we had strict weight requirements. It wasn't just some arbitrary rule, it was about safety. If someone was too light, they could get seriously hurt when hit by another car. After about 20 minutes of waiting in line, they finally reached my station. I weighed the kid, and just as I suspected, he was under the minimum requirement. I politely told the mother that her son was too light for the ride and suggested some other attractions that might be more suitable. She immediately dismissed my concerns, insisting that her son would be fine and demanding that I let him on the ride anyway. When I explained that I couldn't do that, she threatened to just leave him there. I had to remind her that babysitting wasn't part of my job description, which only made her angrier. She started yelling about disrespect, and I decided it wasn't worth arguing anymore. I kept an eye on the kid while letting other guests onto the ride. Just as I was about to start the ride, I heard a loud thump followed by collective gasps from the crowd. My heart dropped when I turned around. The kid had collapsed on the grass near my podium. I immediately grabbed my walkie-talkie and called my manager. I shouted out, asking if anyone had water, and thankfully a kind woman in the crowd handed me her water bottle. I used it to cool down the kid's face. My manager arrived quickly with an ice pack, but throughout this whole ordeal, the mother just stood there, huffing and complaining about the ride not starting. I tried to ignore her until she started yelling again, telling us to leave her son alone and claiming he would be fine. When I told her that her son could die, she just screamed louder, insisting that she knew what was best for her child since she was his mother. That was it. I'd had enough of this woman choosing a carnival ride over her child's well-being. I pulled out my phone and called the police. When she realized what I was doing, she tried to make a run for it, but a bystander managed to hold her down until the authorities arrived. She even had the audacity to try pressing charges against the guy who stopped her from fleeing. The police showed up with an ambulance. The kid, who was starting to regain consciousness, was taken to the hospital, while his mother was put in the back of a police car. Child Protective Services got involved, and they called the kid's father too. They needed to investigate the home situation, but it was clear the mother was in serious trouble. She ended up getting charged with several offenses, including child endangerment. I've been a dentist for over 15 years now, running my own practice in a quiet neighborhood. It's been mostly rewarding, helping people maintain their dental health while building a successful business. My office staff has always been great at handling difficult patients, but nothing could have prepared us for what happened last Wednesday. The day had started normally enough. I had a full schedule of appointments, including one with this demanding patient who'd been coming to my practice for about 6 months. She'd always been challenging, constantly complaining about wait times, demanding immediate appointments, and being rude to my staff. She'd even tried to negotiate prices after treatments were completed, but she always paid eventually, so we tolerated her behavior. That Wednesday, she had an appointment scheduled for 2 p.m. She didn't show up. No call, no message, nothing. We tried reaching her but got no response. It wasn't a huge deal. We'd just charge her the missed appointment fee as per our policy. I finished up with my last patient around 6 p.m., closed the office, and headed home. My wife's a nurse at the local hospital, but she'd managed to get off early that day. We were looking forward to a quiet evening together, something rare given our usually conflicting schedules. We'd just finished making dinner and were sitting down to eat when we heard it. Bang, bang, bang. At first, we thought it was just some kids playing around, but then we heard the screaming. It was Karen, and she was demanding to be let in. She was shouting about how she knew we were home and that we needed to open the door right away. My wife and I looked at each other. I immediately recognized the voice, and my wife asked if it was my patient. The banging continued, getting more aggressive. Karen kept screaming about how her tooth was killing her and that she wasn't leaving until I treated her. I went to the front door with my wife right behind me. She had grabbed her taser, a gift from her brother after she started doing night shifts at the hospital. When I asked Karen what she was doing at my house and how she found it, she admitted to following my car from the office. She kept insisting that she needed treatment immediately and that I couldn't refuse her because she was in pain. I tried explaining that this was my private home, that my office was closed, and reminded her about missing her appointment earlier that day. I told her she needed to leave. Karen wouldn't listen to reason. She kept ranting about how she couldn't make it to her appointment earlier but was here now. She even tried to guilt me by saying I was a doctor who took an oath to help people. I had to remind her that I was a dentist and that's not how things worked. I warned her that I would call the police if she didn't leave. That's when she snapped. She suddenly charged forward, trying to push past me into the house. When she saw my wife, she lunged at her, screaming and blaming her for keeping me from helping with her dental problems. Bad move on her part. My wife didn't hesitate. The taser made contact and Karen went down like a sack of potatoes, twitching on our porch. I told her I was calling the police. Even from her position on the ground, Karen kept threatening to sue me and report me to the dental board, all while insisting that I was supposed to help people. The police arrived within minutes. Turned out Karen had quite a record. Previous incidents of harassment, trespassing, and disorderly conduct. They arrested her on the spot. We later found out she'd been banned from 3 other dental practices in the area for similar behavior. She'd been stalking another dentist for weeks before coming to my practice. The dental board actually contacted me the next day. Apparently, she'd made it onto their watch list of problematic patients. We installed security cameras the next day, and I had a long talk with my office staff about updating our patient screening process. I also found out she'd been harassing my receptionist through social media, something she'd been too afraid to tell me about. Karen's now facing multiple charges, has a restraining order against her, and is banned from my practice permanently. She's now having trouble finding any dentist in the city willing to take her as a patient. Maybe she'll finally learn that being entitled doesn't get you what you want. My doctor changed my cholesterol medicine even though the one I was taking was working well. That turned out to be a big mistake. The new medicine started drying out my muscles without me even realizing it. By January 2019, my muscles had become so weak that I suddenly collapsed. That's how I found myself in a nursing home for rehabilitation. Here in Florida, that's pretty common for seniors who need to recover from various illnesses. The thing is, most of the staff there seemed to think every resident was just waiting around to die. I sure wasn't. I had plans to get better and get out of there. After a couple months of rehab, I had gotten back most of my strength. I still needed a wheelchair, though I was close to being cleared to use a walker instead. That's when I had my first run-in with this one nursing assistant who seemed to think her phone games were more important than her actual job. I had an appointment with a new doctor whose office was about 30 minutes away. Being a first-time patient, I knew there'd be extra paperwork to fill out, so I made sure to be ready extra early. I parked myself in the dining room where everyone could see me, waiting over an hour before the appointment time. What I didn't know was that the nursing assistant playing on her phone at the desk would be my driver. She finally came up to me just 15 minutes before my appointment. She asked if I was ready to go, and I told her I'd been ready for around an hour. She said she just needed to bring the van up. Keep in mind, getting a wheelchair-bound person into a van isn't quick. You need to load them up and secure everything properly. By the time we got to the doctor's office, we were more than 15 minutes late. When we got there, she even tried to take my paperwork from me, like I couldn't handle carrying a few sheets of paper from the van to the receptionist's window. Here I was, perfectly capable of holding some papers, while she couldn't even get off her phone long enough to get me to my appointment on time. The receptionist told me that I was too late for my appointment as their policy didn't allow patients who were more than 15 minutes late. When I asked about rescheduling, she offered to set up a new appointment. I explained that the nursing home would need to handle that to avoid scheduling conflicts. When my next appointment came around, I'd graduated to using a walker. Unfortunately, I got the same nursing assistant as my driver. This time, I wasn't going to sit quietly while she played on her phone. I went right up to the nurse's station to make sure she got moving. But even then, she nearly made me late again by making a personal stop on the way. She tried to control my paperwork again too, like I was some helpless child. We made it just in time for my appointment, but the frustration wasn't over. After seeing the doctor, I came out to find her chatting with the receptionist about job openings at the office. I had to stand there waiting while she collected business cards and discussed potential employment. The receptionist had to remind her I was waiting before she finally decided to do her job. On the way back, she made another personal stop that took so long, I missed lunch and had to eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich instead. That was it for me. I went straight to the director of nursing. When she asked what she could do for me, I told her it was about the nursing assistant. She asked what about her, and that's when I made my position crystal clear. I told her that even if I was lying there with blood gushing from a major arterial wound, I didn't want that nursing assistant to even give me first aid. I'd rather bleed out. I also stated that I wanted her completely uninvolved in any part of my medical needs. I told the director everything: the late appointments, the phone gaming, the personal stops, and her job hunting during work hours. I made it clear I wouldn't have someone delaying my recovery just so she could level up in some mobile game. Another resident warned me that if she got demoted to a regular nursing assistant, I might still have to deal with her. But I wasn't worried. Since I wasn't signed in by family or the state, I had control over my medical care and could refuse treatment from her. Within a week, she was no longer spending her days at the nurse's station playing on her phone. By the time I was discharged, she had disappeared entirely. Turns out the nursing home didn't just take away her cushy position, they showed her the door. I guess they figured someone who puts phone games above patient care isn't someone they wanted on their staff at all. I've been in manufacturing for over a decade, specializing in equipment setup and installation. My role involved working with process engineers to create specialized workstations, each requiring specific equipment kits. Think of them like different sized puzzles made from the same types of pieces. 3 months ago, we got tasked with setting up a new manufacturing process. The process engineers did their planning, and I got to work pricing everything up. The suppliers needed 6 weeks to deliver the equipment, and we had 12 weeks until the process launch. Should have been perfect timing, right? Well, that's when things went sideways. The finance department suddenly pulled all funding. Their brilliant solution? Set up the new process with zero budget. I'm not kidding. I immediately told all the process engineers that we wouldn't be getting any new equipment. In our weekly meetings, I kept repeating myself about how we couldn't move forward without funding for the new kits. They basically ignored me until there were only 5 weeks left. That's when they finally realized they'd be completely screwed without the equipment. Their process times would skyrocket. They all stormed off to the finance department in a panic. A few days later, one of my many bosses, let's call him Boss 1, came to my office looking smug. He excitedly told me he'd secured the money and wanted me to order the kits right away. I had to explain that it wouldn't work since the plans were 12 weeks old and the supplier still needed 6 weeks lead time when we only had 4 weeks left. He insisted we should order anyway and figure something out. When I told him there was no point because the supplier couldn't deliver in time, he decided we should go talk to the supplier ourselves. We drove 3 hours to meet with the supplier, who just confirmed everything I've been saying. They explained that we should have ordered when I first told everyone to, and at this point they couldn't guarantee delivery any sooner than 6 weeks. Boss 1 asked me to leave the room. Later, I found out he likely agreed to pay almost double my original quote to try to speed things up. The next day, Boss 1 told me to create a receiving plan for the kits. I made one showing delivery in 6 weeks, 2 weeks after our deadline. He demanded I change it to show 4 weeks instead of 6. When I pointed out that wouldn't be accurate, he just told me to do it anyway, claiming he'd pressure the supplier to make it happen. I printed 2 copies of the schedule. I gave one to Boss 1 and took the other straight to Boss 2 explaining everything. Boss 2 followed Boss 1 into a management meeting where Boss 1 proudly announced the 4-week delivery timeline. Everyone praised him for saving the project. For the next 4 weeks, Boss 1 called the supplier daily and kept insisting everything was fine. Meanwhile, Boss 2 had me check with the supplier too, and I learned they were in complete chaos trying to fulfill our rush order. When installation day arrived, the supplier wasn't ready. Boss 1 demanded they send whatever they had. Upper management was furious, demanding to know who had promised the equipment would be ready on time. Boss 1 tried to deflect by saying he was just following the receiving schedule. That's when Boss 2 stepped in, pointing out that his equipment specialist had actually given him a schedule showing 6 weeks. Upper management wanted to know why there were 2 different schedules. Boss 1 tried to claim there must have been some mistake he'd look into. When they pressed him about where he got his schedule, he quickly suggested discussing it privately. The delivery was a mess. Remember how I compared the kits to puzzles? Well, the first day, we got all the corner pieces for every kit. The next day, all the bottom edges. Then all the top edges. It took 2 whole weeks of daily deliveries to get complete kits. Exactly 6 weeks after ordering, just like I'd warned them. My team and I worked overtime combining new pieces with old equipment to get things running. We managed to pull it off, but it was exhausting and completely unnecessary. Later, Boss 2 told me that upper management figured out what Boss 1 had done. They gave him an ultimatum: relocate to another country or lose his job entirely. He chose to leave. I stuck around for a few more months, but eventually quit. What's the point of being hired as an expert if your bosses ignore your expertise and then expect you to clean up their mess? They're still struggling with equipment issues because they never learned their lesson about proper planning.